Yeah, thanks for staying with us. This is our weekend conversation centered on family welfare. Today, the plan is to unravel, as much as possible, the issues associated with child adoption. We have two interesting and well-informed guests to help us. First, our take on worries, anxieties, expectations, and more arising from happenings in our dear nation within the week. Helen,
John, there's very
any
little.
cheering news?
Very well. We're live, and so we thank God that's cheering news. And I also read somewhere that the Kebbi State is leading in the payment of gratuities to retirees. That is really very interesting.
One out of how many states?
Well, yeah, but at least, if you consider the plight of the retirees, and the story that surrounds, the difficulties and the challenges that face them, when they're waiting endlessly to get their gratuity. So this is cheering news.
So that's cheering news.
Yeah.
Okay, well, not so cheering news from me.
Okay.
Because there's this buzz about an 80,000 naira per annum tariff for parking on your setback in Lagos State. And a lot of people are beginning to cry out. I mean, what's
80,000?
80,000
parking where?
Plus 50,000 processing fees.
No,
if
I don't understand. Okay.
Outside your fence on the setback, which is government's setback.
Okay, in your house.
In front of your house.
Wow.
Not in your house.
In front of your house, on the streets, outside of your home.
Outside of your home. Well, there's an argument that, well, that's what obtains in many developed nations of the world. If you have to park on the road, so to speak, outside, you have to pay some kind of...
Which means everybody will have to pay that tariff, because even if you're not parking around your house, you drive to some places, the shopping mall, sometimes the salon, the barbing.
Specially designated car lots.
Okay.
And I believe there will be tariffs for them as well.
But we have a lot of people who park on the streets.
That's
you go to some banks and there isn't enough parking space.
That's what we're saying.
Okay.
So that's why we have a lot of outcry over that development.
Wow. In these hard times, John. Yeah.
Well, and then, of course, our condolences to the family of the Nollywood actress. What's her name? Ada Ame, who was laid to rest in Otupo in Benue State.
Did you bring that story because it had to do with Otupo? That's my dear sister.
I think it's your mind working.
Yeah, but no, seriously, the entertainment world has really done well.
Yes.
Since she passed, there's been several talks about her, how well she lived, how well she performed her role.
She was a great actress.
as an actor, and so may her soul rest in peace. Yeah. And I think this is also cheering news that the police authorities are getting firmer on the hungry policemen at the checkpoints who threaten or harass young people, with insisting that they must check their phones. And now it's been drummed in that no, you can't do that. You do not have the right to do that. So
who does that?
So that's another good news. And ASU is still on strike, 6 months down, and some parents are offering to help to raise money now for the universities. How would that work?
Well, I think it's just a desperate move to get the children back to school. I mean, you can't imagine 6 months out of.
Okay.
Wow.
Like I always say, come rain, come shine. I, Helen Omadele, have resolved to look at the brighter side of life, and losing hope is never an option for me. Progress we must make on this show this morning. Once again, we'd like to thank you for always making time to be with us. And it is that time to address the main purpose for today's conversation, child adoption. So join us to welcome our very first guest on today's show. She's Dr. Ngozi Ukeje, a recently retired lecturer from Bayes University, Abuja, with substantial expertise and experience in human resource management and counseling. She is a trainer, a counselor, and mentor. Dr. Ngozi Ukeje is extremely passionate about giving back to society, and she's currently a board council member and fellow of the Institute of Humanitarian Studies and Social Development. She has a lot to say on child adoption, and that's why she's on the show today. Please join us to welcome Dr. Ngozi Ukeje. Hi, good morning, ma'am.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good morning, Dr. Ngozi Ukeje. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good morning, sir.
Many thanks for your
How are you?
patience. Too. I'm very good, thank you. Thanks for asking.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so we are on to child adoption today, and we really want to start by asking what or when does child adoption become necessary, and what are the implications?
That's a loaded question because it's different for everybody. Some people, for them, child adoption is a way of just giving back to community or giving back to society. So the timing is really not as important as the fact that they can actually do it and they can afford to do it. Some people, it has to do with the situation where they are unable to bear children. And so after so many tries, it then becomes necessary for them to look at other options. In our country, it's very, very difficult to say definitely when child adoption becomes necessary because of the stigma that's attached to child adoption.
We're going to get there. All right, well, we'll get there. Now, what are the obligations that the parents would be expected, you know, like what are the conditions that should be met before a family can begin to consider adoptions? What are the obligations of the person or persons who wish to adopt a child?
I think emotionally first, to have your mind set on it, and that you're doing it for the right reasons. You're not doing it out of compulsion. And then what happens is that because you're angry about the situation, you take your anger out on the child. In terms of physical environment, of course, making sure that wherever the child is going to stay, sleep, eat, whatever, is safe. The child is a child of the family. And I think that's where you have to start, is that don't look at the child as a piece of property, but the child is a member of the family. So the way you treat every other member of the family nicely, you treat the child the same way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely, madam. And I mean, it's all about integrating the child seamlessly as possible into the family. Yeah.
Exactly.
Now let's talk a bit about the because this is a legal process predominantly, you know. So how much of the rights of the original parents, if alive, are eroded or retained in child adoption?
Now, it depends on the law that you're following, and it depends on the situation of the birth parent or birth mother or birth parents, because sometimes it's both parents that will decide that they're going to give a child up for adoption. It's not always only the mother. So depending on the agency that you go through and depending on the organization that you work with, some organizations sever complete connection to the birth parents. Some, depending again, might give a partial connection where it could be something like on birthdays, you can send them a card or a gift. So it all depends on the original contract. If you have an actual legal contract. In our country, there are adoptions that are not always done through the legal process.
That's right. That's right. Yes.
All right. Okay. So a child is ready to go to another family to become adopted. When is this child certified or regarded to be ready? Now, we're considering age, we're considering health status and all of that. at what point is a child ready or qualified for
Right
adoption?
Right after birth, as long as the doctor says the child is fine.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can adopt a child that is 2, 3, or 4 days old. Again, making sure that the baby has gone through proper health checks. If you're doing it legally. Now, if you're doing it because it's a family member, as long as the baby is okay, then you can adopt.
What about the social implications? I mean, like, what about the social implications? Like the environment into which the child will be adopted into? And what do we need to look out for?
Well, the social implications, from my perspective and from personal experience in our family, it's just a matter of the individual being ready to provide everything that the child is going to need. Like, if you're adopting a baby, making sure that you can get the formula that you need to feed the baby, making sure that you have finances to buy clothing, take the baby to the doctor for their monthly checkups. And so those would be the social things that I would think about that are important. Again, making sure that the social environment that the child is coming into is safe, it's healthy environment, and again, the emotional status of the parents that are adopting that child has to be in question. Are they really emotionally ready to do what they need to do to bring this child up as their own, not as an adopted child?
Okay, all right. When I was having a conversation with you earlier, you talked about having a personal experience in your family, as regards this subject matter.
Yes.
Can you share that with us, against the background of, can an adopted child, legally adopted child, at any point of his or her life, review the adoption agreement or contract, like you said?
In some countries, that is acceptable. In our context in Nigeria, it probably isn't that readily available to be done. Again, because of the fact that we are not so good at keeping documents. And so 18 years later, when the child is considered an adult and the child decides, oh, okay, I've just found out that I'm adopted, I want to go to the agency where the documents were processed, and you can probably find out that the agency doesn't exist anymore. And if that's the case, the documents don't exist either, because we don't have a clearinghouse where we put those kinds of documents.
Okay.
So something just caught my attention in that response that you gave, that, for instance, a child attains the age of 18 and then decides that, or finds out that I've been adopted. Now, I see this as a problem with most families who adopt. They find it difficult to decide when to reveal to the child that he or she is adopted. Would you want to talk to that?
Yes. Again, if the child has been well cared for, and the environment that the child has grown up in has always been a loving environment, because that's the other thing, the child needs to feel loved. There are ways of telling a child that they have been adopted into the family without using the word adopted.
Yeah.
And still having the child feel like they are still part of the family, and that there's no stigma attached to it. In our family, we have children that we have adopted into the family, and if you come to our household, you cannot tell that they were adopted. They are treated with the same level of love, care, and attention that any other member of the household is treated with. And some of them came into the family at 3 days old, some at 2 weeks old. So it all depends on the family. If you're treating the child like they don't belong, then the child is going to ask the question.
Okay. So the issue of child adoption is not only associated with families who are unable to have their own children, because at the beginning you talked about it's some kind of welfare package or welfare service. Sometimes maybe in a community you observe or discover that some particular household, they are unable, maybe they have a lot of children and some issues and they are unable to attend adequately to their children, and some other families can render assistance. Would that be adoption, or there's another word, that you take not total charge of the child is in your care for custody, would that be? Can you share? Okay.
In our culture, we've been doing what we probably wouldn't call it adoption as a legal word, but in our culture for centuries, we've been involved in child adoption, where there's a young girl in the family who gets pregnant. We hide it as much as possible. And then all of a sudden, the auntie now has a baby. And basically, the auntie has taken the child from the young teenager, and now that child now becomes the auntie's child, and the aunt takes care of the child, provides all the necessary needs that the child needs to grow up, go to school, feed the child, clothe the child, educate the child. And years down the line, nobody remembers or nobody speaks about the fact that Auntie Susie didn't really give birth to the child, that it was Bere who actually gave birth to the child, but Auntie Susie took the child, and the child now is Auntie Susie's child. So we've been doing this for centuries. We just didn't call it adoption. Now, in the legal environment, now you call it child adoption.
So actually, the truth is that there's a very thin line between child custody and adoption. Yes?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, now, I would, yeah, go ahead, ma'am.
It's a legal term. Child adoption has now become a legal term.
Yeah.
And so if you are in the system, the legal system, then you have to go through the nuances of child adoption. So whatever those terms are, depending on the country and depending on the reason behind the adoption, you can do it. Most of us have heard of celebrities who have gone to different countries to adopt children. And so they have what I call a mishmash of children from different countries living under their roof, and they have legally adopted them. So that's going on as we speak.
Yeah. If you asked me, I mean, this whole thing appears to be such a delicate and sensitive, matter, and really needs to be handled by professionals. If you look at the Nigerian environment, which you're familiar with, how much professionalism are we getting from managing child adoption?
Do you want it in percentages?
just a cursory look. I mean,
well, the thing about it is, who is paying attention, and who is really checking all these agencies that call themselves adoptive agencies or child welfare agencies? So it's really difficult to say what the actual percentage is of what we consider legal adoption. Some people will say that it's like purchasing a child, because there's a lot that is asked of you to pay for that child or towards the process. And others will say, well, went to a midwife, and the midwife said this, that, and the other, and so we ended up giving the midwife 100,000 naira, and now we have a baby. So
Okay. Okay.
it all depends.
All right, but that won't be the official process, because I know in most states the Department of, or the Ministry of Social Welfare and Child Development or something is directly in charge of child adoptions, and I guess it's a long process because apart from the fact that we have baby factories here and there, which are not legal outlets for, those babies, the ones who, the various homes that are authorized to provide children for adoption, it's like there are not too many children there based on the requirement, of the families looking for children to adopt. So the process is a bit lengthy, officially, I think. Now, let's roll over to the adopted child and the identity of the child. How far can the adopting parents alter his or her identity? Is it total? Is it partial?
Again, I would say if you adopt a baby, you immediately altered the child's identity, because the child now, you'll name the child, because in many cases, let's say you adopt a 3-day-old baby. In many cases, either the baby hasn't been named yet, so you get to name the baby. That already has altered the child's identity. If the baby was born in the northern hemisphere of our country and somebody in the southern hemisphere adopts that child, guess what? That child is going to live in that kind of an environment, and so already I changed the identity of the child. So the identity of the child now is based on the environment that the child is growing up.
Okay. All right.
That's interesting, actually.
Very interesting.
Actually, well, I hear we have just a few seconds more. I was going to ask you, I was going to play devil's advocate.
As usual.
A child born out of wedlock and then gets brought into the home. Is that child adopted or owned in another way?
A child born out of wedlock and is brought into
a marriage environment, yeah.
If it's
from either parent.
Yeah. So you wouldn't consider that adoption. You would consider it a child brought into the household from out of wedlock.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So
now, some people.
Okay, wait. We seem to be losing you. Are you still there? We seem to be losing you, and we're losing out on time too. Okay. Can you hear us? All right. Okay. Let's quickly take a break. We're supposed to have 2 guests. I believe the second guest is waiting. If we haven't been able to make contact with him, then we will continue with you after the break. But meanwhile, let's just quickly take a break, and thank you, Madam, for being with us. Let's take a break.
Yeah, thanks for staying with us. And, well, of course, welcome back. A quick reminder that our focus is child adoption. And we are worried that with the availability of this option as an alternative for couples, many are hindered from embracing it due to maybe various social and cultural factors, as well as misconceptions. Yeah.
So many misconceptions. And so our guest is still with us, Dr. Ukeje. Thank you so much. And we'll go round to the next segment. Now, we have noticed that at some point of the adopted child's identity, revelation, you touched on this a little bit, and you told us that there's a strategy, there's a specific way to do it without letting the child know, using that word adoption. you didn't go into details. Can you be more clear on this? You know, what's
The
the
how.
the how? What's the strategy? You know, especially when you have other children, because some people who have their own biological children go ahead to adopt, you know. So when there are other siblings around, how do you let this child know that, in quotes, he or she was adopted?
Thank you so much for bringing me back. It's actually about language. It's the words that you use. You sit down and you talk to the child when you know that they are at the age of understanding what you're saying to them, and you say, you know, you're a blessing to our family. God brought you to our family when our family was looking for a young girl or a young boy, and we have totally embraced you. We love you. There's nothing that you're going to ever lack in your life. We're always going to be your mommy and your daddy, or whatever phrases that you use to explain who you are to the children. And you let them know whatever you ever need, just ask, just let us know. We, on the other hand, as your parents, will make sure that you get what you need to make your life better.
Okay.
I personally have adopted not only little children, but I've also adopted adults.
Okay.
In the sense that the adults have come and asked me to be their mother. And they've lived with me. In some cases, I've been the one who's given them away at their wedding. Their children now become my grandchildren. So that's what I was talking about in terms of a personal experience myself. And it's worked.
Okay.
So it's all about attitude.
Okay. Okay. Just quickly before John asks his next question, I'm going to ask, still based on this, what's the disadvantage or advantage, or which is a better option, to keep mute or to, you know, break the silence to let the child know this is how you came into the family?
Again, it depends on how the child came into the family. If the child came into the family at 2 or 3 days old and there's no knowledge of who the mother of the child is, then it's absolutely not necessary to say anything. Now, if the child was a little older and the parents are still alive and may or may not have interaction with the child, then at some point when you feel the child is old enough, 10, 11, 12 years old, that time frame, you sit the child down and let the child know. But you do it in a way that you don't antagonize the child, and you don't make it such an issue that the child walks around with a burden on their shoulders for the rest of their lives.
Okay.
And do you think that you would need the help of a psychologist sometimes?
A professional?
A professional psychologist?
I think it depends on the family. Yeah, I think it depends on the family and why they're doing what they're doing. Then I don't see where a psychologist is necessary.
Okay.
Now, if there seems to be a behavioral issue around that whole counselor or psychologist or someone who can be the barrier or be the connection between the child and the family.
Sorry, Helen, maybe I should...
Go on. Go on, John.
Yeah, let me jump in here again because, when we started off the program, you said a few things about cultural practices. I'd like to know how universal the rules guiding adoptions are. Are they as universal as they may?
That's the legal process of adoption.
Yeah, no, it's broken into two now. You have the legal aspect, and you also have the cultural, maybe religious practices. How balanced are they? What are the possible differences that we may find?
In our country, it's not balanced. Nationwide, it's not balanced. And in the world, each country has its own rules and regulations around adoption. So what happens in the United States is not necessarily what's going to happen in Nigeria or what's going to happen in Liberia or what happens in South Africa compared to what happens in England or in Germany or in France. So there's no universal law. What I've noticed is that, especially for Americans who leave America and come to other countries to do the adoption, if they have the money, it's a lot easier for them to do the adoption out of America. If they don't have the money, it becomes extremely difficult for that to happen. Adoptions in the United States are very well scrutinized. They actually come and investigate your family. They put you through a whole slew of interview questions. Your house is inspected and checked out. Even your neighbors are asked questions about the family. In some cases, they may even go to your job and ask questions about you. So it's very extensive and can take quite some time for that to go through. In Nigeria, we have adoption agencies, but they're not that thorough. They do not come to your house to see whether you live in a good environment. They just take your word for it. So those are the differences, at least off the top of my head.
All right, and that bit you just said kind of negates the whole essence of adoption, like I know, because at the end of the day, the interest of the child is uppermost. And so when the authorities are not concerned about the well-being, the conducive environment where this child is coming into, then there is a problem. Now, in a situation where a couple, is unable to have a child as a result of infertility, and they go ahead to adopt a child legally, and a miracle happens, and they have their own natural baby or babies afterwards. Now, we are in an environment where the first child syndrome is very key. Can this adopted child who came into the home, first of all, still be seen as the first child and claim, the entitlement of the first child?
Well, you use the word legally.
Yes.
So if we're going to do things legally, then that child is legally the first child of the family. Now, if you want to do things culturally, depending on the family and what their status is, the child could either be considered the first child of the family or can be considered an additional child to the family and not the first child. So which platform are we using? Are we using the strictly legal platform, or are we mixing legality with culture? And if we're mixing legality with culture, in many cases, depending on the family structure and the members of that family, culture may supersede, because somebody will be angry, especially if the family that the child has come into is well off. And maybe, let's say, the father in that family has now passed away, and there's a squabble and a struggle over land and property. All of a sudden, Uncle Thomas, who has not said anything in the past, will now say, hey, that child is not our blood, so that child cannot inherit the father's property. I'm the next person online because I'm his junior brother or senior brother, so I get to take all the property. So it really is, in our culture, difficult. Again, if the adoptive parents don't state in their will what they want, that can be a problem.
Okay.
If you want to use the legal aspects.
That really can be a problem, because I was going to ask, how legal is culture?
Has his own rules.
Yeah, because no, I mean, how far legal can culture be in this situation?
That's the question.
That is the question.
That's the question. That's the question. Especially in an environment
And
where we
in many
hold so
cases,
much.
because we are culturally bound people, we tend to lean more to culture, except that it's starting to change where people are now
Okay.
actually writing wills. And so because they're actually writing wills, and we're actually having lawyers and barristers who are taking on the responsibility of executing those wills, in many cases, we are getting beyond the cultural bias or the cultural hold on these kinds of things.
Okay. All right. So I think at this point, we'll have to let you go, painfully too, because I thought I was just beginning to dig into the program.
Yes,
We want to
yes,
thank you so much, Dr. Ukeje, for being with us. And we must actually acknowledge that we've had to keep you up at this time of the morning out there. So we'll take a break now, and we'll move on to
All right.
the gym.
Thank you
here in
so
the
much.
studio.
Thank you so much for your time. And we thought we would have a little more time to look at the other aspect of unwanted pregnancy, teenage pregnancy, and all of that. But we could do a part 2 of the show subsequently. Thank you again, and please have a lovely, lovely day out there. Thank you. All right. So like John said, we're moving
We'll move
on
on to the gym, and thereafter we'll have Pharaoh
Okay.
with her guest.
All right. So let's go to the gym right away.